Welcome to Salute and Biohacking podcast. My name is Vanessa Bertinotti and my mission is to build a tribe that shares my same passion for health optimization and biohacking by bringing to the table experts and people who inspire me. If you are not yet familiar with this term, biohacking is basically the art of developing our potential. The element that characterizes all my guests is the belief that improving one's health in a preventive form is always more beneficial than treating disease. Many diseases could be prevented if people began to be more aware of their bodies and how they function. All the information contained in this podcast is purely informative and does not replace medical or therapeutic consultancy. If you are a fan of this podcast, please help me spread it to as many people as possible. I explain how to rate the podcast, write a review, or make a donation on my website, 𝐷happyFew.com. Find the link to my website in the show notes of this episode. My guest today is Justin Maguire. He specialized in integrative medicine with a background in biochemistry, physiology, and nutrition. He's the founder of Autonomic Coaching in Johannesburg, South Africa. Justin, welcome to the show, and I'm thrilled to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Vanessa, an absolute pleasure. It's lovely to hear from you again. We had such a great time to connect in London, so thank you for having me.
Thank you. And today we will understand the importance of the bidirectional restoration of the nervous system. But before we dive into today's topic, can you tell us about your journey, how you got to where you are now, and what is your mission?
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So my journey, believe it or not, actually stemmed from a completely different paradigm of life. I think a lot of people probably went through similar contrasts, where in that, in our earlier years, partying too much, being naughty, doing all the things that are destructive to our health up until we get to a point where the universe gives us a bit of a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much how I got into the intricacies and the passion of those intricacies behind biohacking and utilizing modalities such as endocrinology, immunology, and the biochemical factors involved in all of that toward improving the outcome of overall well-being and health. So these are real intricate pieces of passion for me. But what got me to that point was a real dark night of the soul, whereby I had previously actually developed a drug addiction problem during the course of my 20s, and subsequently had to face the facts of the poor decisions I'd made due to poor psychological trauma or poor contention of psychological trauma, leading me down that very dark path. But it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, having crashed and burned, because once I came out of the ashes, like the phoenix, I was able to not only improve my own health, but being inspired to doing that for so many others out there. And that's why, for me, the first and foremost, biggest part of biohacking that serves my passionate direction is that of neurochemistry.
Very interesting and fascinating. So your mission is to really help people optimize their health from whatever background they came from, right?
Correct. Absolutely right. I think what's most important to take into account or consideration is that every person has their own unique and individual story. And this stems well past just the means of what's going on in their physiology or their biochemistry. Often the outcome of poor health is not just by the means of necessarily a poor diet, although that is a contributing factor, but we have to ask ourselves, why is there a poor diet? Why are people willingly and knowingly feeding themselves toxins when they very well know the outcome is going to be a shorter lifespan and a poorer quality of life? And this is what brought me to the inspiration of starting Autonomic Coaching, by understanding that the intricacies behind restoring a person's opportunity to live the best possible life is far more elaborate than what we give it credit for.
So there is a big part of the emotional healing, right, in your process.
Oh, very much so. And although I myself am not a psychotherapist, I'm very blessed to be able to have in my team very, very qualified psychotherapists, which we don't coin the term psychotherapists. We actually call them cognitive personal trainers, just to avoid the negative connotation that people have around that terminology. But the fusion behind the work that I do in order to revamp the terrain so that neurotransmission can take positive effect along with their therapeutic practice just proves to be so profoundly beneficial that it's changed so many, many lives, and it continues to do so. But there is a synergy to the practice of healing that transcends well beyond just taking supplements or wearing blue light blocking glasses. And I believe it comes down to addressing issues of the heart as well as issues of the mind.
Beautiful. And can you explain what's integrative medicine for you and how does it differ from conventional medicine?
Well, I think this is the word integrate, right? So you integrate different modalities within a continuum. Now, we ask ourselves, what does that mean? Like, what are we trying to integrate? Well, we're not only trying to incorporate a pill for an ill. Okay, this is not the MO of our efforts, right? We're not trying to just avoid symptoms, but we're trying to understand the root cause of those symptoms, which is what integrative medicine does well beyond conventional medicine. Don't get me wrong, I have so many friends that are doctors and they're phenomenal human beings. And I actually feel a lot of empathy for conventional medical doctors that haven't yet been exposed to integrative therapies because they become so indoctrinated, excuse the irony to that term, in that they are inundated with huge amounts of workload to be able to even get to the point of qualification. And at the end of their tenancy, they're so emotionally distant or so much emotional dissonance has been created due to pure exhaustion that they eventually just start applying systems to deal with pathologies. Now, I don't believe in treating a pathology. I believe in identifying a pathology, but I believe in treating systems, right? Systems that lead to the outcome of pathology. Where I think the big difference between integrative and conventional medicine exists, in that integrative medicine deals with addressing reformation of the entire organism, the person, the individual, whereas conventional medicine tries to treat the disease, the pathology in question.
Awesome. And what's your definition of optimal health? What does it mean for you?
For me, optimal health is not always being able to necessarily run a mile, although people are going to turn an eyebrow to this thing. What do you mean by that? And it's also not always being in a constant state of fatigue, but it's actually understanding that there are moments in life where one will experience both. And to be able to respond appropriately in the moment, being able to be present to what your body is doing and what you're experiencing, no matter the circumstances. I believe that is optimal health because it transcends that of just the body and it actually enforces a strong character of mind. I think the big risk in biohacking is for people to become rather neurotic in trying to record and calculate ways in which to offset the likelihood of feeling bad. Where in actual fact, sometimes going through moments of shadow are exactly what we need in order to have the motivation to really experience the most brilliant and brightest of our light. But it's very important to understand what that shadow is when we're going through it, and that requires for us to be present in the moment. So for me, optimal health is not always being able to perform at your best, although it is about being able to perform at your best more frequently, but it's about being more conscious about what it is that your body's doing and what you can do in order to support it going through its own seasons, its winters and its summers.
Beautiful. Yes, then maybe later we will also speak about those seasons for women, because you are also interested and you work a lot with women and like hormonal therapy as well. So I'm really interested in your view in this field. But before we talk about this topic, I would like to ask you, what is the autonomic nervous system and how does it affect our metabolism and our immune system?
Thank you for that question. So the autonomic nervous system consists of two segments, namely the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. What do these mean? In the most rudimentary sense, it's the way in which homeostasis balances itself. And what I mean by that is how well we're able to produce energy and how well we're able to recover from the energy that we produce. So the autonomic nervous system, when one would be in a state of sympathetic dominance, as an example, one might feel anxiety, stress, if that sympathetic dominance is too elevated. However, we do need to be in sympathetic states at different points of the day in order to be in a position where we can liberate energy for our bodies to be able to use. In contrast, a parasympathetic state is when we're in a state of deep recovery. And this is something that we want to be in when we're about to go to bed and rest and recover. We don't want to be wired and tired at the same time. So parasympathetic dominance, however, can also lead us into states of chronic fatigue. So the autonomic nervous system pretty much comprises ways in which we need to look into how balance between how much energy we release and how we can recover from the energy release is in a state of constant expression and experience. Mm-hmm. How does this relate to other factors of health? Well, exactly that. If you are dominant in any state within the autonomic spectrum, you're going to find that certain symptoms and outcomes of pathologies will be expressed. Inflammatory disorders or compromised outcomes of neurological, cognitive capacity, lack of focus, brain fog, so on and so forth. So it really does come down to the control, or not the control, but the impact that it has in correlation to both the endocrine and immunological systems in the body.
Very interesting. And so it's a question of balancing this parasympathetic and sympathetic, right?
Yes, I like to think of it in a very simplistic term as the throttle and the brake to our life. Mm-hmm. If we are going to accelerate through every moment in life, eventually we're going to burn our engine out and we're going to go into a state of premature aging and disease. However, if we push the brakes the whole time, we don't get anywhere, right? So it's very much a balancing act as how well we're driving our lives through the balance of parasympathetic and sympathetic tone.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there is a lot to do with awareness, I suppose, awareness of our environment and our inner self as well?
Most certainly. And I think that it's bidirectional, actually. I think the ability that we have to be aware is very much reliant on what state of our bodies are in. Mm-hmm. And the state of our bodies are very much dependent upon what we perceive our environments to be. Mm-hmm. So one can really feed the other in a beneficial or a detrimental way. It all depends upon how well the hormetic, which is a term that describes a moment of stress that the body is exposed to toward the outcome of homeostatic adaptation, which can be positive or negative on the spectrum. So it very much is dependent upon where our hormetic effect can either prove to be beneficial or detrimental based upon both internal and external environmental factors and the perception that the nervous system has to either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what are the main pillars to restore the autonomic nervous system? The main pillars.
Very, very good question. I think if you were to look at a whole multitude of different literature means, you would come up with many different definitions. Mm-hmm. But personally, I believe it is the trifecta of the mind, the body, and the soul. Oh. And practice around all three are vitally important towards restoring our autonomic nervous system. Very, very much so. So I think the three pillars for me would be the mind, the body, and the soul, and practical ways in which to improve that. I haven't stopped studying since I left. Actually, I've never stopped studying, because if I think about my school years, I was still studying. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go out and get a whole plethora of degrees, but keep yourself proactively involved in learning and acquiring new information is a way in which induces plasticity and keeps you young. So I think in terms of keeping the mind proactive, it is an imperative way toward improving the health of the autonomic nervous system. The body, such an intricate, subject, and multitude of different variables within it. If we consider the 12 major physiological systems and many subsystems in relation to that, we really need to think of, in functional medicine terms, the hierarchy of where our bodies are functioning or loosening their function, stemming or starting from the upper gastrointestinal tract, moving right on down to the immune system, and how that domino effect of dysfunction can really cause a knock-on outcome to the body when it exists in the higher echelon of the hierarchy outcome of physiologic systems in functional medicine paradigm. And the soul, whatever, you don't have to be religious, you don't have to be dogmatic, but I do believe thinking of elements outside of oneself and how we form a part of a greater whole is imperative towards, firstly, taking away the pressure that we put on ourselves to be perfect, and understanding that we're just purely an instrument in a very big machine toward the potential benefit of life as a whole. And however you seem to fulfill that, whether it be meditation, whether it be, traditional religious practice, if that is your thing, or, whether it be doing charitable work and allowing yourself that spiritual connection with another human being just by being generous. These are very, very important aspects toward improving our experience of life. And it very much is an involvement of looking both within as well as outside of ourselves in order to gain that clarity, and also to take away the pressure or the neuroses of doing too much of one thing.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful because few, like 1.5 year ago, I interviewed a Shaolin monk, and I did an episode with him. And actually, he lives quite like 5 minutes from my house. And he also talked about these three pillars. So I see a common path between him and what you just said. So soul, mind, and body. So it's really interesting.
I have been people have told me that I am the reincarnation of a monk. So
Yeah?
it doesn't surprise me.
Wow. Wow, you see?
I'm not sure if it's because I keep my hair as short as it is, or if it's because of my values. I hope it's more the latter.
But when I met you in London, I could feel like a very nice soul. So I think there is something very true about the similarity between you and that monk that I interview and who lives near my house. So yeah, there is something.
Well, I appreciate that immense compliment, because it truly is. I mean, to be compared to anything the likes of somebody that has such dedicated practice toward the betterment of humanity is just truly an honor. So thank you for that wonderful compliment.
Great. And about measuring, you know that in the biohacking world and in the functional medicine, we talk a lot about HRV as one very important metric to auto-regulate also stress and this autonomic nervous system. So how important is to monitor our HRV in this process for you?
Good question. A controversial answer you're going to receive from this question.
I knew.
Very, very controversial. I think first and foremost, you got to think about the individual. You got to take into consideration the individual at hand that you are suggesting the tracking of HRV to. people can become very disheartened based on numbers, right? And sometimes HRV does not depict how a person is feeling. And I think our experience is first and foremost the most important aspect to take into consideration. Granted, our experience can be skewed from what's going on in our body. I totally acknowledge that. But I think in the opposite end of the spectrum, when we create obsession, unhealthy obsession about being perfect due to a number variable, it can really cause a disease in its own right? Dis-ease. When it comes to HRV, people also need to understand, I think the current general understanding around HRV is more is better and less is worse, which is not true. It's very far from the point. Actually, Dr. Gonzalez, in his book, Nutrition and the Autonomic Nervous System, quite eloquently depicts what we need to take into consideration around the autonomic nervous system, in that every individual is born with a specific autonomic tone or autonomic variable, dependent upon where the lineage comes from. And we really need to think about this. So, as I mentioned to you before, sympathetic is the process of releasing energy in a very rudimentary sense, right? How the body goes about releasing stress hormones to cause energy release. Now, if you were to live near the equator, where the sun or exposure to the sun is higher, you're going to have an increased release of energy occur just by the fact of oxidative stress being higher. Now, if you've had many a generation living in that region of the world, isn't it to be expected that you would have a more likely increased sympathetic tone in your HRV variability than, in contrast, an Eskimo, right, that hasn't necessarily had that much sunlight exposure and has lived in extreme cold. So we really need to take into consideration cultural and genetic variability when it comes to heart rate variability to first and foremost determine what is our optimal and healthy HRV. By no means does an elevate, so if you go about trying to improve HRV and all of a sudden you go from having an average HRV of say 30 to 90 and you think you're doing well, it's by no means a sign of actual improvement. It actually could be a sign that you're compromising your health by putting yourself in an excess of parasympathetic activity. So things really need to be understood in a better light, and they're not as transparent and obvious as what people think. And because of that, although I do utilize HRV to a certain degree within my practice, I do emphasize to any of my individuals, and I like to call them individuals, not patients or clients. And there's a rationale to that. Side note, the rationale why I don't like to call them clients is because it's very transactional, and patients implies that people are ill. And I believe in the biology of belief, and Bruce Lipton eloquently also depicts this in his book, The Biology of Belief, to words and vocabulary that we use to depict our state. So I'm always on the point of creating the understanding of individuals. So with that being said, when I do speak to any of the individuals that we do help, in the utility of HRV, I always make clear to them that this is an additional metric that we use alongside tried and tested metrics. I'm very old school. I know so many people have said that you should have been born in the 50s because I really like tradition, especially if it's worked. Now, there's 4 metrics that have worked over centuries, and these metrics are body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, and blood sugar, right? And these are the 4 core metrics that I use, and different means and ways on how to go about utilizing them. Sometimes fasted, sometimes prandial outcomes. It all depends on the person that we're trying to help. Now, I always correlate what is going on with those 4 metrics in relation to what's going on with HRV. But I never, ever, ever would look at HRV in a position of singularity to dictate whether or not health is getting worse or improving.
Perfect. Yes, I got you. And how vision is related to our brain, and which function have our eyes in this field?
Amazing. So firstly, we got to remember that vision is actually the process of orchestration and inhibition from the nervous system. And what I mean by that is, the nervous system is constantly firing. And in order for us not to literally burn ourselves out, there are certain sequences in control regions in the brain that cause inhibition. Now, for example, sight is very much so controlled by the superior collicus, which is found in the basal ganglia region of the midbrain. How we go about increasing or decreasing our sight and vision is all dependent upon photon exposure and light. And to that further point, when we look at the basal ganglia, the neurotransmitter that has the most dramatic impact to subsequently creating dilation or constriction is to that of dopamine. And really, when we are trying to improve our vision, we really need to look into ways in which we can regulate the quantity of dopamine production and very, very importantly, filtration. Too much dopamine is just as bad as not having enough dopamine, as can be seen in the contrast between Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
Interesting. And can you explain how our visual system works and what happens when we stressed or relaxed?
Absolutely, yeah. So when we stress, so first and foremost, just for people to have a bit of an anatomy 101, there are certain elements of the eye. So we have the sclera, which is the white of the eye, that protects the cornea and the iris and the pupil. We have the cornea. This is transparent and allows light to enter into the eye. The iris constricts or dilates the eye and creates an adjustment of light passing into the eye. The pupil opening in the coloring of the disc. The retina is a membrane of nervous tissue that sends light into the nervous signals. And then the optic nerve regulates the receipt of light from the retina and processes an orchestration of image production in the central nervous system. So it very much is the question of what is going on from the environment to alter the impact of the retinal activation or inhibition as to how those signals are sent through to the brain in order to perceive certain images as to what is actually going on. Now, eye movements themselves are also very much controlled, as I mentioned to you before, by inhibitory signals that part of the basal ganglia called the substantia nigra retinacula actually sends out in order for those projections of images to have enough time for the brain to process what is going on. Now, if this part of the basal ganglia wasn't as active as it should be, then all these images that are coming right through the retina would actually be garbage. We wouldn't be able to know what is going for what. And we can see this when we are in certain cases of, for example, drug overdose, where people become completely demented and hysteric, where they actually don't know where they are, or they perceive what goes on around them to be completely different from the reality of such. And it really comes back down to an imbalance of excitatory to inhibitory signals that occur within the central nervous system based upon poor peripheral receipt into the brain itself.
Interesting. And so it's fair to say that what we see and how we view the world has an incredible impact on our state of mind and on our metabolism, correct?
Or most certainly, yeah, definitely. As far as control regions to vagal tone are concerned, if you look at like the section of communication between the anterior insula and the amygdala, it also has close association to the causative outcomes of basal ganglia activity, which can heighten the activity of stress to that region of the brain itself. So most certainly what we see can influence the outcome of calm or stress, and what we feel can influence what we perceive to be stressful or calming.
And so when also we change our pattern of breathing, we change our inner state. There are all these devices that can help us regulate our autonomic nervous system through breathing. If our state changes, our breathing changes. So it is correct to say that both vision and breathing have a profound effect on our internal state, and they are both bidirectional.
Most certainly, oxygen flow to the brain also has a dramatic impact on the release of neurotransmitters.
Hmm.
And this can clearly be seen if you look at different breathing modalities. For example, traditional box breathing, 4-second holds and 4-second exhalation, inhalation, so on, in contrast to, say, some of Wim Hof's modalities of rapid breathing practice, has a very different impact into the release of either calming gamma aminobutyric acid, which is what box breathing has been demonstrated to do through scientific study, in contrast to facilitating a dopamine height, and in fact, in a lot of Wim Hof's modalities as well. So the way in which you breathe and the way in which you practice breathing can dramatically influence either your excitation or your inhibition to whatever state you wish to be in life.
Hmm. So it's correct that inhaling is more activate the sympathetic, and the exhale it's activating more the parasympathetic. Is it correct or?
Yeah, I mean, the more oxygen that comes in, you must remember any time that you're breathing, if you were to think in a very simplistic term, a person that's exercising in contrast to a person that's sedentary, a person that's exercising is going to create more oxidative stress in the body just by the fact that they're producing more energy. And that oxidative stress has to be facilitated by sympathetic reactions. And the nervous system is the control center that induces those sympathetic reactions. So for certain, by a rapid inhalation, you are going to increase oxidative outcomes and create more excitation. And through processes of lowered inhalation volume or frequency, and even breath holds to a certain degree, can actually instigate, even though a person, depend upon the volume of the breath hold. Obviously, if you're going to hold your breath for 10 minutes, you might have a problem. But in light of what we're discussing, certain moments of hypoxia can actually create immense parasympathetic outcomes. And this has also been noted in a lot of psychedelic medicine research as to the reasons why, certain substances like psilocybin can facilitate neuroplasticity. And what they found was quite interesting in that, a lot of these substances, LSD, psilocybin, a lot of the agonists can actually induce momentary hypoxia, and in doing so, actually facilitate a parasympathetic outcome to the nervous system.
And how can we leverage the visual system and the breathing system in order to take control over our internal state? You talk about meditation, breathing, and so there is like some strategies to work on our internal state.
Absolutely. I think, to keep it basic first as possible, keep it as simple as possible at first. Before, there are so many different exercise modalities that can train different tracking of eye movement and placement and critical thinking around strategical thinking around how to place different positions of objects and so on and so forth. But before we get into the intricacies of within those complexities, just by taking time to look up from your computer screen and look outside your window and get your vision, your depth perception increased to far vision rather than just looking narrow vision, can have a huge impact onto the muscles that control and regulate the eyes and the function of the eyes. So a very simplistic practice like that around vision can go a long way. And then obviously other modalities such as protecting our eyes from certain types of light exposure can also go a long way. We live in a technologically demanding world. I wouldn't necessarily say advanced because it's questionable as to what it's done to society, but I'd definitely say demanding. And with the demands of technology, so too does the exposure of a whole array and frequencies of light come into contention. So with that being said, we really need to look into ways in which we can alter our lifestyle to be able to contend better with the stressful effects of light that isn't necessarily manifested or produced by nature itself. And this is very important to understand in relation to its impact on genes, such as 𝐾𝐿 and BLAM genes, and how this can impact the suprachiasmatic nucleus toward outcomes of circadian rhythm. And what we can do in order to, quote unquote, biohack our potential and possibility toward improved vision by taking advantage of the natural means of light, but also avoiding the outcomes of artificial stimulation causing an over-excitation, over-sympathetic stimulus, causing eventual degradation, burning of that engine, destruction of our eyes. When it comes to breathing, there's practice, meditation, but I think when it comes to breathing, it's very important to really understand where our thoughts are, not just what we're doing in terms of, the time that we're taking to breathe in or out, but where are our thoughts? And often when we recognize that our thoughts are in a position of either self-condemnation, judgment, fear, anxiety, and we just take a step outside of that for a moment and analyze the situation for what it is, this can have a dramatic impact on our breathing rhythm. Just by being a third person to your life process for a moment can truly alter the state and rhythm of your breathing. And then obviously there are other biohacks that can be put into place, like utilizing bicarbonate soda can also improve respiration variables, particularly in states where there isn't enough carbon dioxide in the system, causing poor pressure gradient of oxygen, magnesiums and many other minerals as well that can also improve oxidative phosphorylation, improving the outcome of mitochondrial respiration, which will have a directional impact onto a higher level systems, physiological effects such as that of the lungs themselves.
Interesting. And yeah, as you said, in the biohacking community, there are many strategy that works on the direction to calm down or to leverage the circadian rhythm. So we talk a lot about the importance of watching sunlight for 10 minutes every morning upon waking to set our circadian rhythm. Can you explain why this simple behavior is so beneficial for a huge range of biological function and brain state?
Absolutely. So what we need to understand first and foremost, before we get into the positive effects of natural blue light, is the difference between methylation and acetylation.
Yeah.
Methylation, in a very rudimentary sense, is when we produce certain neurotransmitters. When we're talking about the nervous system now, obviously it has many other functions in the body apart from just producing neurotransmitters. Acetylation, in a very rudimentary sense, is the transport of those neurotransmitters. Now, what blue light does, it increases our methylation, our rates of methylation, so that we are in a better state to be able to produce certain neurotransmitters. And as we go throughout the day, certain processes of acetylation can come into effect through difference of sympathetic stimulus that actually can facilitate acetylation outcomes, creating the potential of the transport of those neurotransmitters. So blue light plays a huge role in our ability to regulate the production of key players to the nervous system, natural blue light. To this further point, blue light also has a role in the production of serotonin, not just dopamine. I think a lot of people understand and know or have heard of the role that natural blue light has in the morning to increase in the release of dopamine, hence the reason why it makes you feel better and more motivated to get into your day. However, blue light, natural blue light, also increases the production, actually not just natural, artificial blue light can also increase the production of serotonin. Now, there's probably a few people going out there saying, really? Can an artificial blue light from a computer screen increase the production of serotonin? Yes, but not necessarily the serotonin you want in the central nervous system. must remember, serotonin can also be produced in the periphery. And it all comes down to the impact of 5-hydroxyltryptophan, either 1 or 2. Now, 5-hydroxyltryptophan 2 plays a huge enzymic role in the production of serotonin in the central nervous system, as opposed to 5-hydroxyltryptophan 1. The major big difference between the two is that 5-HT2 actually requires vitamin D, i.e. from natural sunlight, in contrast to 5-HT1 not requiring vitamin D. What impact does this have, and what effect does this have on the body? Well, from a perspective of parasitic burden as well as fungal burden, but predominantly parasitic burden, parasites actually feed off of serotonin. This is how they proliferate in our bodies. This is another reason as to why people feel increasingly worse during the full moon spectrum, whereby there's an increase of lunar activity and light compromising the body's ability to methylate serotonin into melatonin. So, quite a little food for thought here. If you have increasingly compromised sleep during the full moon, and I'm talking about everybody has somewhat of a distorted sleep rhythm during the time of the full moon, but dramatically so, you may want to think about whether or not you're harboring parasites or other forms of dysbiotic profiles in your gastrointestinal tract. So blue light plays a huge role in the production, but as to how we regulate and direct that production is very, very important to take into consideration our lifestyle measures to ensure that we're not producing more of something that can create disease, i.e. dysbiosis, parasitic burden, or in certain cases, such as looking at computer screens in the late hours of the evening, cause an excess of dopamine to be released, causing the increased outcome likelihood of dopamine quinone production as well, which is extremely neurodegenerative to the brain. So this is for me, the major differences and considerations, benefits and shortfalls that one needs to take into consideration between natural light spectrums and artificial light spectrums.
Very interesting. Also, you are also an expert on gut microbiome, and you just recently, I saw one of your stories that you had some trouble with iron, and you talk about this bacterial, I think, infection. I don't remember exactly, but something was going on between gut and absorbing iron.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been quite devastating. Fortunately, it didn't take me too long to recover from it because I knew what to do. But it actually came about through a sequence of events. So I'm not sure if many out there would know about this, but most flight attendants can't donate organs if they have been in service for more than 2 years. The reason for this is due to cosmic radiation.
Wow.
So what had happened, I've been on 31 international flights in the last 6 months. So quite a lot of international travel and quite a lot of pressure on the system to contend with that travel. And in one of my trips, I had gone on a long-haul flight. It must have been, a total travel time of 15 hours because you had to do a connecting flight to get to my destination. There was no direct flights. And by the time I got there, as one would expect, my immune system was dampened due to the increase of cortisol and associated oxidative damage that was going on. I arrived in India, beautiful country, by the way, and wonderful human beings. But the only downside to India is that it is an air-conditioned culture, and a lot of the air conditions are not necessarily serviced well or maintained. So in my stay at my hotel, I had a subtle hint that something may have been awry. And suffice, lo and behold, I was actually inhaling mold spores. Now, mold's been around forever. It's not a new thing. However, more and more people are developing mold toxicity. And I think it's due to, in part, the increasing activity of technological advancements and what they're having, as I mentioned in aforementioned points, to the balance of oxidative outcomes in the body, dampening immunity. So yeah, I caught mold toxicity as ochratoxin in particular. And what mold does, Candida has a very similar affinity, but mold feeds off of iron and zinc predominantly. So
Mm.
although my diet has ample, ample intake of iron coming from multitude of organ meats, and I love my steak. I am South African after all.
Mhm. Mhm.
Actually, my iron just dropped to abysmally low levels, and one of the reasons why I noticed this prior to getting my organic acid test results back is that I actually started developing exercise-induced asthma. Really,
Mm.
and it's like, what is going on here? Which is very much so indicative of iron-based anemia. And lo and behold, when I did my serum iron markers and the associated other, TIBC, UIBC, and all the wonderful markers associated with that, I was actually struggling with iron-based anemia, with also an association to poor ceruloplasmin production, which actually had led me into a state of hypothyroidism, believe it or
Mm.
not.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been a journey. I'm definitely in much better health now, but I took an intricate and integrated
Mhm.
approach in order to deal with it. It wasn't just about giving antifungals or binders, but also about looking into the hormonal paradigm of what needed to support mitochondrial capacity to regulate the immune system's ability to deal with
Mhm.
the mycotoxicity at hand. Um, yeah, which subsequently had me utilizing certain thyroid support in DT with very positive outcomes. But anytime we approach any paradigm of this nature, it has to be done with utmost due caution, which is where those four aforementioned biometrics, tried and tested, stand the test of time and stand above the rest when it comes to moderating and modulating any therapies, any advanced therapies such as hormone replacement therapies as well, particularly in states of immunological compromise where they can show immense benefit of hastening the effect of immunological recovery if utilized correctly.
Mhm. So interesting. So I interrupt you with this question because I was very curious on how you approach this your health, and so you had already your protocol in place. It was just a question to figure out with your panel and with analysis what you had, and then you put a protocol in place. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. So obviously I had already been biohacking, if you want to call it
Yeah.
that, my health from different directions, but the paradigm shifted, which
Mhm.
meant that protocol direction had to change. But in order to get, it's like having, in order to get the compass we need to know where our ships need to go,
Mhm.
investigative work had to be done.
Okay.
Um, and the symptoms proved to be incredibly informative as to what direction that investigative work needed to go toward.
Mhm. Mhm. And so your approach with the new individual, like you like to call your clients, um, you start like measuring first. So with tests such as blood test, DNA test, microbiome test, hormonal test. And then you find like a solution. What is your approach when somebody comes to you and tell you its symptoms?
First and foremost, before we throw money at diagnostics,
Okay.
it is so important to take the individual's history into consideration. Very, very important. So before I even suggest any blood marker, any functional diagnostic, we ask individuals to go through a very lengthy process whereby they complete a series of intake forms, which are unfortunately very well, fortunately for me to be thorough, but unfortunately for the person that's struggling, extremely long.
Mm.
Now, the rationale for the length of the forms is that each question has pertinence to a physiological system. And through that evaluation, we can have a very good subjective understanding of where within their bodies they're struggling. Now, crossing that or comparing that information to past historical medical outcomes, we're able to get a very good context of what is actually going on. And from that context, that's when I launch and deploy objective parameter testing, such as functional blood chemistry analysis, organic acids, microbiome, methylated DNA, dried hormone, urinalysis, hair tissue mineral analysis. I mean, there's such a huge list of available options, and we're not even touching into certain cases such as Lyme's, where that list is even more extensive. For us to really determine firstly, what pathologies are being expressed, but more importantly, what systems are being compromised in that expression of those particular pathologies. And in knowing that, that's where the secret lies in order to not just treat a symptom, but to cure the route of dysfunction and disease.
So your step is always analysis first, like this form to fill out forms, and then about the history of and the background of the individual, and then start doing some tests, and then you have like a team of people that are specialized in different area, or how are you organized? So
once we've got a good differential, and that's different. So provisional understanding or provisional prognosis is pretty much what a person would get when they go to a doctor's office and have flu. The doctor might take a stethoscope, listen to the breathing rhythm, listen to symptoms, and give antibiotics, which is so haphazard to say the least. Right? That's a provisional diagnosis. A differential diagnosis is what I just explained, whereby we take all the factors into consideration to really have a comprehensive understanding of what to do. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. So once we've got a protocol design in place, before we even implement that protocol design, the first initial month, apart from cases of severe health compromise, in those cases, we may have more immediate actionable points. But generally, 90% of people that come to us are those struggling with menopause, andropause, chronic fatigue, chronic autoimmunity, so on and so forth, or those just wanting to improve their performance in the corporate or the entrepreneurial space, which we have a lot of as well. But the first month is just about revamping their environment. And actually seeing what they're doing. For example, what is the quality of air that they're breathing every day? Or do they have non-native EMF protective devices available in their home? What is the quality of water that they're drinking? Or what exactly are they using to clean out their oral health and cavities? And this is where my good friend, Dr. Dominic Nischwitz, has got invaluable resources of information to share. If anybody interested, definitely check him out on that point. But these are all very important lifestyle variables that we set the tone within the first month of coaching that the particular individual would be working with us. Now, in that first month, often the intricacies of the protocol at times require us to have certain elements compounded through respective independent compound pharmacies, such as for the likes of bioidentical hormone replacement. So once they've gone through their initial environmental reform, by the time that they've done that and gotten into the habitual outcome of better eating, better living, more conscious record keeping of how they're feeling, not just about numbers, but from a subjective perspective, that's when they start to receive their protocol. And this is where the intricacies of the application of that protocol take light in real-time data exchange, whereby most of our individuals, not most, all of our individuals we help would submit real-time biometrics, as I mentioned to you before, the 4 core to Autonomic Coaching, and then obviously any additional variables that we can utilize through API plugins derived from Aura or from Garmin, we also take into consideration into our analysis, our real-time analysis, which basically takes a span of a week. So every single week, our individuals have a call with us to go over the trajectory of what all these variables are doing. as well as to be able to discuss the symptoms, physiological symptoms that they're experiencing in light of those biometric variable alterations or projections. Now, that's what they do with me, and that's only a segment of what they actually get from us. We also have, as I mentioned before, 2 other cognitive personal trainers involved, one of which helps to give actual practical exercise toward improving eye tracking, breathing rates, vagal tone. Her name is 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐿 Watkins. She's an absolute genius when it comes to understanding functional neurology. And then we also have another therapist that works with autonomic coaching, and her name is Tonya, and she is an absolute phenomenal human being when it comes to understanding the intricacies of internal dialogue, external influence on that internal dialogue, and how to interconnect the salience, the executive, and the default mode network into a position that can actually create optimal outcomes and alterations of perception. So the combination of all of us working together in a continuum really provides that support behind the mind, the body, and the soul toward improving, ongoing improvement of the outcomes to their efforts in what they do with us. And this can last for a deemed period dependent upon the outcome of objective findings that we have allocated or identified, in the objective diagnostics, from anywhere as little as 8 weeks to a period of even up to 36 weeks in duration. And dependent upon however long that duration would need to last for, we'd have continual intervals of reanalysis set into place in order for follow-up diagnostics to be done, in order to ensure that not only do the biometric variables showcase a positive trajectory and outcome, but also that we have tangible results in physiological systems that can be noted through the outcomes of improvement in diagnostic variables such as blood chemistry or organic acids, amongst many others.
Wow, sounds really great. And you talk a lot about this emotional healing. What do you think about hypnosis? Is something that you consider in your process or not?
I think hypnosis needs to be done with extreme due caution and care. It does work, but if it is employed too soon, it can actually cause a lot more harm than good. Delving into the subconscious when the subconscious is in a state of apathy can really cause a lot of havoc and can resurface emotions that the brain has purposely switched itself off from in terms of in order to put itself in a position of survival. So I think hypnosis has its benefit, and I have utilized it for my own healing many a time. However, it is not a modality to dive into straight away.
Okay,
It
yeah.
is something to incorporate when the person is ready. Due to the nature of our work being remote, we do offer in-clinic therapies for people to come in for health holidays, vacations, renewals. But due to the nature of our work being remote, we're not privy to recommending hypnosis through us, but we do have a extensive network of other therapists that do provide these type of therapies. And we always recommend, when it comes to modalities such as hypnosis, or even in-clinic psychedelic therapies, that it should be done on site in a safe and secure environment, but not done on a remote basis with somebody halfway across the world giving you advice. And anything can go wrong, and we first and foremost need to ensure that any of our practice is done in the most safe and considerate way possible.
Perfect. And you are also known as an expert in the peptide. Do you want to talk also about this topic, or it's maybe too complicated right now and you prefer to go in another place? Let me know.
I think when it comes to peptides,
Yes.
it's a very broad topic.
Yes.
And yes, it's a topic of passion,
Yeah.
very much so. But I think for the purpose of any of the audience listening in on this, to be able to have digestible, points of information that they can take away from this, not to be overwhelmed. I would love to have a follow-up segment with you sometime on this topic on a separate call.
Okay, perfect. And you also talk about the hormonal replacement therapy. I, for example, I'm in perimenopause, and I have quite a journey to find some specialist in this field, and I'm taking bioidentical hormonal replacement therapy, and I think you talk a lot about symptoms, but for people like, for example, myself, that don't really have big symptoms, that feels well, that is in a optimal health journey, do you think hormonal replacement therapy could be also like anti-aging or preventive other form of disease?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good.
I think one of my favorite teachers comes to hormone therapies, and I've done an incredible amount of education on the topic. It's a doctor named 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐿𝐻, based out of Florida.
Okay.
He's actually an ER specialist, but probably the most comprehensive understanding into endocrinology, more so than any endocrinologist I've ever spoken to. And I really like his stance on hormone therapies. Is that, traditional endocrinology, they look in treating the hormone marker, which is so short-sighted. What we need to think about is, sure, a person may not necessarily have apparent symptoms as to what we know convention to dictate our hormonal symptoms, but what about outcomes of physiological dysfunction? For example, what impact does low testosterone have on atherosclerosis, and what's going on with your lipids? What impact does estrogen have on increased microglial activity in the brain, and outcomes of poor memory, right? What impact does the entire hormone complex have on bone density, muscle loss, sarcopenia, cellular senescence? So what we know for certain is that when the body becomes deficient in any communicative pathway, and hormones are merely a communicative pathway, it's going to have to compensate somehow. And often the ways in which it does so is by developing dysregulated cellular activity. Outcomes such as senescence can take place, or in certain cases, oncogenesis can actually even develop. So it's very important, in my perspective, hormonal therapies is the first and foremost point that a person really needs to look into if there is a deficiency and compromise toward the anti-aging paradigm. And to that point, we really have to ask ourselves, is there a hormonal compromise due to the sequence of DNA and the aging effect creating that compromise? Or is it due to an environmental toxin issue that's actually compromising the signaling perspective of hormones themselves? And to go about the replacement strategy in accordance of whether or not it's a primary or secondary mechanism, and understanding that not everybody necessarily needs to be taking a hormone as per se, but if there's compromise in situations whereby they don't have to be taking hormones, we need to remove that compromise, and in certain cases, possibly even supplement momentarily up until the point of which regulation of hormonal signaling can take back into optimal health and positioning.
Interesting. So also your approach is not only for people who are feeling not so well, but it's also for people who want to prevent disease and want to be in an optimal state. So you
Absolutely, yeah. 80% of our individual base are high performing individuals that are looking for that edge, right? Like, they spent the good part of 20 plus years building their careers or their business empires, and now they're starting to experience subtle but yet still nonetheless apparent decline of mental focus, acuity, memory recall, and they're like, you know what, I don't feel ill, I'm still very healthy. I can still go for a 10-kilometer run if I want to. However, I'm not the version of myself I know I can be.
Okay.
And often when somebody has that suspicion, there is some merit to it. And we take that merit into account, and we look for ways in which to bring a person back to their most prime self so they can continue to contribute to the world in the ways in which they know that they should be doing so.
Beautiful. And we haven't talked about nutrition, and you talk a little bit about supplementation, but I think it's also one of your pillars. Which role have nutrition and supplementation in your process, in this process?
So supplementation, sure, that's a very broad topic. So
Yeah.
firstly, nutrition, really, when we look at nutrition, we have to ask ourselves, what elements or chemicals within food are causing contributional compromise to any of the immunological, endocrinological, or neurological processes in the body. An example of this would be increased consumption of lectins, could be instigating dysregulated inflammatory outcomes, causing outcomes of compromised hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal function through mediating, and for this particular audience, I'm only going to use this terminology, but mediating nuclear factor kappa beta increase, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in these circumstances, we need to take out the disruptors. A very rudimentary way of looking into ways we can restore our health, not rudimentary, I need to retract that statement, a very simplistic yet effective way in which we should first and foremost start by improving our nutritional health is by removing the core four, which are refined oils, sugars, gluten, and dairy. Now, I know dairy has become a hot topic of the debate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Noting the benefits and how we have deteriorated our capacity to tolerate dairy and how dairy is not all that bad. Obviously, there's different casein chains. You've got your A1, A2 casein chains derived. The difference being that your pro-inflammatory casein chains not pro-inflammatory, rather your opioid-like effect. Casomorphine peptide chains actually have histidine on the end of the sequence, whereas your A2 casein chains derived from 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐿 cow milk, as an example, have this proline amino acid at the end of its chain, which has a better dramatic impact in producing glutathione. Now, all those differences are good and well. However, what we also need to take into consideration is that you need a fair amount of healthy bifidobacteria in order to tolerate the benefits of milk intake. That means the quantity needs to be considered, right? If you're going to put stress in the system to having to metabolize a surplus of any type of nutrient, what are the outcomes going to be? That some form of depletion may occur. And this is also very evident when it comes to our availability of bifidobacteria. So I think when we look into ways to reform our health, it really needs to start with the basics. For a lot of people, it's cutting out dairy. For many, it's cutting out gluten. As controversial as those two topics may be in biohacking, and for most, it is cutting out, I think everyone, cutting out refined sugar, although it's very addictive, and although I still enjoy my chocolate, we should do our best to cut that out, and refined oils should be a definite no in our nutritional equation. But then we've got other elements like oxalates. Is there an accumulation of oxalates going on in the body, and what are the reasons for them? Dietary oxalates, in my opinion, are a very small contributing factor to compromised copper and iron, calcium, and magnesium activity, or compromised red blood cell health as well. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of fungus or fungal overgrowth actually has a capacity to produce and release oxalates. So situations where you're already dealing with an environmental element such as fungal overgrowth contributing toward an oxalate load, this is where dietary considerations need to be taken to effect to limit the compounding impact. And this is where nutrition really needs to be individualized rather than just haphazardly approached. And they said these are just elements of specific like foods, sources that have more histamine, more lectins, more oxalates, and we're not even going into the more broad terminology of dietary inclusion, like ketogenic diets or carb backloading or fasting modalities. I think that they all have their place. However, I think at any point whereby we implement a dietary strategy, such as, for example, fasting or keto, on an ongoing basis, we are going to cause an imbalance at some point. It's inevitable. So I think when we're approaching any of these modalities, we first have to ask ourselves, what is the rationale toward the effort in doing so? And often, it's most of the time it's vanity. Let's be honest here. Most of the time, anybody starts a dietary plan, it's vanity. You do have points where ill health is in concern, but I'm talking about the general masses now. And I think with regards to that subject matter, in terms of having a better body composition, I think one needs to really start with the basics and just cutting out food that isn't produced by this earth and trying to eat more of have a more seasonal approach to the food that you put on your plate. I think those are the very two basic points that a person can implement straight away and notice immediate health benefits without becoming inundated with increasingly intense detail to which most people that have busy lives and careers are going to find it incredibly difficult to manage and maintain the implementation of. So nutrition needs to be taken with a psychological consideration, not just a pragmatic inclusion as to what a person can do, and well, firstly, what they're currently doing and what they should do from that position, to not make such a huge radical shift to the point where they're destined to fail. Failure has more of a dramatic impact onto the mind and the body than eating a few foods that have lectins or oxalates in them. So before going for the complexities, I think it's very important to establish the regularities of basics of health eating, which are in my opinion, the emittance of the core four, and trying to eat seasonal foods whilst refraining from any refined man-made produce.
Absolutely. And we haven't talked also about a very important topic, I think, to restore the autonomic nervous system is sleep. Do you want to talk also about this topic? I know there are all big topics but all I think are part of this system.
Yeah, sleep is very important. And sleep has become more and more distorted over the years. And I believe the reason as to why sleep is becoming more and more of an issue is due to, predominantly, in my opinion, this is totally my opinion now, technological advancements and the plethora of information that a person needs to contend with on a daily basis. We literally have information overload every single day, just by the fact of anybody that has a smartphone and that would even spend an hour on social media, you are going to be exposed to more information than at any point of any of our ancestors had to contend with, in a week's period. You'll probably deal with that within a day's period. I think information overload is a big contributing factor towards compromised sleep. And to that point, how that information is accessed, also to our earlier points, the compromise toward methylation rates, neurotransmitter production, and what segments of the body, and the outcome that this would also have on specific gene expressions such as the 𝐾𝐿 and BLAM genes. Not to mention, our environmental toxicity issue is extremely high, with such things such as halides, aluminium, heavy metals, organophosphates, all of which have a dramatic impact on the calcification of the pineal gland, which is extremely important in the regulation, the production of melatonin. So sleep hygiene is vitally important, particularly in the modern day world. I would highly suggest, switching off Wi-Fi routers before bed, making sure to try to refrain from electronic stimulus, at least an hour before you go to sleep, if not 2 to 3. Also, dietary measures toward improving sleep are not set in stone. right? So I think everybody's been told don't eat too close to bed. Well, this may not be true if you have certain expressions of male genes, right? Which in certain cases, having a small fatty meal before bed may actually improve your sleep. So nutritional concepts around improving sleep should be taken in context of the individual, and not in context of the general population. But lifestyle aspects into sleep and the importance of regulating sleep can be seen in the prevention of diseases such as Alzheimer's. For the most part, poor sleep instigates the outcome of propagation to neural entanglements and beta amyloid, due to the fact that most of our lymphatic drainage occurs during hours of sleep, particularly deep wave sleep. So with poor activity, i.e. poor sleep, we are going to notice cognitive decline and subsequent emotional or psychopathological expression, such as depression, anxiety, ADD, amongst many others, from starting to be expressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's a broad topic, and thank you for giving some tips about around sleep. And in your health journey, which are the daily routine or few routine that have worked the best for you, and that you keep doing consistently, and you think that for many people could also work?
Yeah, my daily routine would consist first and foremost of waking up, not to my phone,
Mm-hmm.
making sure to keep that aside, hydrating, hydrate,
Mm-hmm.
utilizing freshly squeezed lemon juice into water with some salt in order to improve the hydration of my body, and then taking time to set the tone for the day. The first half an hour when we wake up, our brains are shifting from a theta state into a beta state, and that's when we are most impressionable to motivation, in either direction, positive or negative motivation. And this is an opportunity that we can take toward altering how we perceive our day and how we perceive ourselves and our capacity to perform. And there's different ways in which you can go about doing so. Either reflecting, journaling. For me personally, I've always utilized audiobook from philosophical giants such as Alan Watts to motivate me for the day ahead. And I listen to them in the first half an hour of the day whilst drinking my water and getting myself into the flow of what needs to be done. Other points of the day, biohacks that I love. I have a walking treadmill at my desk. I've got a standing desk adjustment. Huge game changer, particularly anybody that works in a logical framework utilizing computers, to make sure that you're getting movement in, that you're not in a sedentary state. Utilizing blue light blockers after 6 p.m., big game changer toward improving sleep outcomes. Vivo base, non-native EMF protection. I definitely have that in my home. Big game changers there too. Knowing when to employ fasting, right? Knowing when not to. Coming down based upon the 4 variables and metrics that I mentioned to you before.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all biohacks that are very much applied in the moment of presence and being able to be present in what the day requires. But habitually, I think the start and end of my day generally occur in the same way, in that the start of my day, I take time to enforce positive reiteration of what is possible, and at the end of the day, in order to switch off excessive information exchange so that I can give myself a moment in order to reflect on all the outcomes that have occurred throughout the day.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And maybe do you have any particular message that you want to spread to our listeners today?
I think the most important message that I could share with any individual out there that's looking for a way in which to change the perception of their life. First and foremost, understand that what you are feeling is a cry from your soul, from your body, and from your life toward motivating you to change. Now, that might seem a very superficial, like, what does that exactly mean? If you are in a state of frustration, whether it be that you don't feel like you're performing at your best, or more severely, that you're in pain, this is something to look into, not to become neurotic by, but to look into from all perspectives and realize that you are capable of living your best and most ultimate potential. And all that it requires is just shifting the needle ever so slightly and gently by adopting very, very simple at first habits toward the betterment of your health. And the most important habit to that is to looking in ways toward improving positive self-reflection. And we can easily accomplish this by setting achievable goals for ourselves in life, whether it be eating healthier, whether it be reading a book, or just being kind to the people around us.
Love it. And just a last question before letting you go. What do you think are the monitoring tool or wearable that allows us to gain greater awareness of how our body works, and what's the right approach to avoid the risk of falling into obsessive behavior? At the beginning, you talk also about the blood sugar. Do you think, for example, CGM could be helpful for some people, or it can make people stressed? Or do you have like Oura Ring, or you are very skeptical about those? How do you say?
I think it comes down to the context of the individual.
Yeah.
I couldn't suggest, Aura is great for a certain type of person, but for people that are overly type A, I think it could be destructive.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
Garmin's great for athletes, especially outdoor fanatics, great. But for others, maybe not so much, right? It can just enforce self-flagellation for the fact that they're not getting enough steps in, which a lot of people don't. So I really think I can't answer that question and say, oh, this is the best device, because I don't see things from a surface level perspective.
Yeah.
Although I love to service the biohacking community, and although I do biohack myself, I first and foremost always try to take the individual into consideration, rather than the industry into consideration. And there are different components in the industry that can serve different people, but it's the individual that needs to be considered behind a purchase of any aid. Because some aids can be destructive and others constructive.
Yeah, so I think this episode, it is very useful for many people that are obsessed about technology, obsessed about making too many exams, or being perfect in many ways. I think you brought up a lot of wisdom, and your experience is so broad and so complex that's interesting to talk with people like you, because some tools that we think are necessary to be healthy or to measure things are not really, maybe they don't really help us, but they make us struggle more than anything else. So thank you for your wisdom and to share all this knowledge with us today. Thank you, Justin.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for just all the effort that you're putting forward in order to educate people toward a better opportunity and experience in life.
So thank you. Hope to see you soon, and enjoy your next weeks in your trip. I know that you are going far away from South Africa. And
yet another experience of cosmic radiation. But we've got our biohacks in place. It's fine.
So thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.